Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Jen Barrett. She won election for the Orleans County State's Attorney's Office last fall, and she took office early this year. She's here today to talk about how her first month in office has been. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thanks, Scott.
Well, was the campaign all worth it? Because you campaigned hard, but now you had to hit the ground running.
Absolutely. It was completely worth all the hard work that went into it. And the new job has been just as difficult as I thought it would be and just as much work, but it's exactly what I wanted.
But it must, I've talked to you before. It must have been hard, though, to come into cases that were already moving forward, because didn't you have to get yourself up to speed on those cases that you hadn't started with?
Yeah, it's difficult to take a case that any attorney had been working on and take it as your own. And so that was certainly one of the challenges that we faced when we got into the office. But now we're at a point where we're starting to get to cases that are coming to trial that are ones that we started with, and it's a whole different scenario now that we have cases that we worked on from the very beginning.
Right. I've heard a lot of positive too, because the last few years, I think there's been a lot of disappointment in our prosecutor's office, and I think that came out during the election, which pitted, several people. But I hear there's a lot of people who really like what you and your office are doing, because you're actually now taking crime seriously.
Yeah, I mean, the past is the past, but we've been working really hard to focus on the vision that I represented to the community during the campaign and really move forward with those visions in the way that I see that the prosecutor's office should work, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Right. I think about, back to the election, a lot of people were concerned about your age, because you are youthful, but you're also very energetic, and I think you've really proven that. And I think you've proven to a lot of people, you might be young, but you are tenacious too. I don't want to end up in your courtroom.
You shouldn't.
I've never had, tell me, do you meet many people like me? I've never even had a darn speeding ticket.
I don't think you're the norm, Scott.
No, I'm not the norm in many ways. I've only had one parking ticket, no speeding tickets. So go figure, if I end up in your courtroom, it might be something really big then. So when you think of the state's attorney's office, everybody thinks of you. You're the state's attorney, but you're not a one-person show.
No, my office has two other attorneys, two victim advocates, one who works full-time and a half-time, and two administrative assistants. And so when I took office, I brought on a team of people who I thought would support my vision. I brought on Michelle Donnelly. She was a deputy state's attorney from Washington County. I brought on Christopher Mall. He was an attorney prosecutor from Lamoille County. He has over 30 years of experience. I brought on Amanda Jensen. She's a victim advocate who worked with the state police for a number of years, and she transitioned into my office. And I brought on Beth Martin, who I took from one of the banks, and she's been a really great administrative assistant. I brought on two people from the old team, Jane Malgiri. She's continuing to be administrative assistant. She's worked in the office for almost 30 years. And Vicki Tebow, who also, she's a victim advocate. She's worked in the office for almost 30 years.
So in other words, is you actually have people working in your office who have worked there longer than you've been alive.
That's accurate.
That must provide some real context to the office, though, and the region, because, I think having that historic background must help you.
Yeah, it's certainly a wealth of knowledge that couldn't be replaced by anybody else in the community. Someone who's been in the office and seen 5 state's attorneys is amazing.
And do you tap into that every once in a while?
I use it all the time.
Right. Has there been any challenges with the new job for you?
I don't think there's been challenges. It's been a significant amount of work. It was a lot of work to go through every single open file when we got there and reorganize them and make sure that they had all the materials that we needed. it's started to be more consistent. It's always a lot of work, but it's slowed down a little bit in the sense of we're familiar with all of the cases now, and we're moving forward as a team.
Right. Did you when you got to the office? Was it pretty well intact? You know, that nobody did any nobody removed records or anything.
Yeah, the office was in fairly decent condition.
So since you took office, though, there's been some high-profile cases we've had, and I know you can't talk about them, but there's been one. There's been a murder in Brownington. Then just recently there was an attempted murder. So you've had some high-profile ones. As an attorney, as an state's attorney, are these some? You know, you don't ever look forward to them, but is prosecuting those something that you? I don't know if the right word is enjoy, but it must be a challenge.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge to prosecute any complex case, especially ones that are very serious and have a lot at stake.
Right. You know, I would be, we've talked about this before, I'd be horrible at your job. I'd be, like if somebody stole the car, and if they said, no, I didn't really mean to steal it. When I broke into the car and took the keys, and I thought it was my car, I said, so you really thought it was yours? Yeah, I thought, well, okay, just don't, just be a little more careful next time. You're not like that, are you?
Absolutely not, Scott.
It's, you are innocent until proven guilty, though.
Yes, absolutely.
I could go to a courtroom. I could convince you I was 100% guilty, even though I'm innocent. When I come across the border, especially when I was younger, it was like, whatever the look was, it said guilt written all over it, and I didn't do anything wrong. So you've cleaned up all the backlog of cases that came with your position, and now you're starting to move forward.
Yeah, we've gotten through most of the cases that were from the previous administration. There's still a few stragglers, but mostly we're working on cases that have started while we've been in office.
Have you kept all your promises so far? Campaign promises, including to law enforcement?
Absolutely. We've been working really hard to rebuild the relationships with law enforcement in terms of working with them collaboratively to address crime in the community, and I think that we've been successful doing that so far. The law enforcement work really, really hard, and they want to know that their cases are being prosecuted with the care in which they put them together. And we really work to do that, and we work with them very frequently.
Right. What about... Have you made any moves yet, not only to prosecute cases, but I also know you wanted to be very community oriented. Have you thought anything about what we're going to do about this supposed drug epidemic?
I think about it all the time, Scott. It's really an awful issue in our community, and I constantly think about what we could be doing as a community to better address it. I've noticed since I've been in office that it's as significant as a problem as I thought it was. We've had 5 or 6 overdose deaths related to drug overdose. We've seen a huge increase in the cases in the juvenile court that relate to opiate addiction, and we see a lot of criminal cases that have an addiction component. And it's hard because the criminal justice system obviously doesn't resolve or solve an addiction issue, and we work with community providers, and we try to add as a condition of release when a case comes in to do a substance abuse screening, but in terms of it being a community issue, the criminal justice system isn't going to resolve it, but we're doing what we can to address it through our system. But it is something that I constantly think about how as a community we could better address.
And when you think of drug abuse, you often think of the legal implications. But I was just interviewing a doctor who's retiring, Dr. Peck. He's been an OBGYN for 35 years, and he was telling me it's a staggering the number of people who are expectant, who come through with opiates in their system, and that has a profound effect in numerous ways, but particularly for the life of the baby. So it's a far-reaching. It isn't just court. It isn't just property thefts. Drug addiction is impacting our society in so many ways.
It really is, and it affects the community in countless ways. We see it in terms of the criminal implications, so property thefts, burglaries, people stealing to support their addiction. We see a lot of people who are driving under the influence of the drugs, which is dangerous, and it's a huge concern for public safety. And then we see just the implications in other aspects of the community.
As you know, I was speaking to one of your frequent flyers in your courtroom who has since reoffended, but he came up to me in the store, and he admitted he's trying to recover from addiction, and he actually wanted to come on this show because he knows he has messed up and he wants to get better, but he can't seem to get it right. But he certainly does not want other people to live the life that he's living, because I've known people who, I have a person close to me who's a recovered addict, and she will say that there's very, very few people who want to be an addict, but it takes work. You can't take a pill, you can't take buprenorphine, you can't take methadone and just expect that to work. You have to want to be recovered.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that there's no such thing really in my mind as recovered.
Right.
The people who are addicts are struggling for a lifetime to battle this addiction, and there's relapses. But it is true, it can't just be a court order or a pill or anything else that's going to fix addiction. It has to be a real desire from within to change and to not give in to the substance.
But how I understand how, like, an older generation of people, before there was a lot of education, got into heroin or the pills. I might understand that. It's just like I understand how people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s got into smoking. But I don't understand how, if you're a teenager now or early 20s, you know that this is horrible stuff. You know addiction, the path is going to lead you to. How do they get involved, and what are they thinking?
Well, I certainly can't speculate as to what they're thinking, but I think a lot of it is that it's a slippery slope. So people are experimenting with pills, oxycodone, other painkillers that are legally prescribed, and that becomes a habit, and that habit is then fed by heroin, and heroin is a similar high to the pills, and it's a lot cheaper. And so I think for a lot of people, it's just a slippery slope from experimenting with pills to a full-blown heroin addiction.
I know the person who I know who is recovering, who's totally clean, and I'd put my life on this person will never use again. But she was telling me that there's, because addicts are not all, the people that you think of. There are functioning addicts out there, and there are people that you might not think of. But she was saying that there's this kind of like underworld where everybody, they have communications, who you can get things from, including, they even know, she was telling me the doctors. She says there's like Dr. So-and-so, you can scam him into giving you anything, but then there's Dr. So-and-so, another doctor that, oh no, don't even go there trying to get an aspirin. But she said there's just a underworld of communications that they feed on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar necessarily with the underworld, but I think that the addiction problem in our community doesn't discriminate by socioeconomic classes. It's everybody. It's any family. Anyone could really slide into the addiction. And so I think that there are certain people that people know to talk to and how to get the drugs. I think it's a really creative process for them to figure out where they should go and who they should talk to. And then once it's figured out, they share it with their friends.
So what's the real secret? Like, we can talk all we want about drug addiction and how to solve it, but really, how do you solve it?
I don't know. I think that we as a community need to continue to support the people who are recovering. From the criminal justice standpoint, we need to focus with addicts on rehabilitation. But again, you have to want to change. And so you can force an addict into treatment, but unless they're taking it seriously, it's not going to impact the addiction.
And I know I'm going to oversimplify it, like, and look through my rose-colored glasses, but the addiction is one thing, but how people get to this boat, I still think is a family thing too. I think there's a lot more family and society. I think we're also failing a lot of people in different ways. Especially as families.
I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that. I think that might be oversimplifying.
I already said I was going to look through my rose-colored glasses and oversimplify.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it does start at home and making sure that we're spending time with our children and knowing where they are when they're in high school. Those things help to prevent some people from becoming addicts, but I think that any family and any structure could be subjected to having someone who's an addict.
Right. Okay, off the topic of addiction is, what else are you working on? What other trends are you seeing in the kingdom?
I'm passionate about domestic violence cases. We've seen a significant number of repeat offenders in domestic assault cases, and so that's obviously of significant concern. One of the things that I promised that I would do and have done is implemented conditions of probation that are specific to domestic violence in order to better rehabilitate people who are on probation, who are appropriate candidates for probation. We've also been focusing on requesting that the court hold dangerous repeat offenders without bail pending their resolution, so they don't have the opportunity to continue to hurt their victims.
And I know you can't talk about specific cases, but I know in an attempted murder case, he was a repeat offender. You managed to get him held without bail, so you're actually managing to do it.
That's what we're advocating for, and we've been fairly successful in cases like that.
Right. Because I think that was one of the things because the previous administration, they weren't so proactive on that. Do you think that'll save lives in the long run too?
Absolutely. I think that the previous administration took an approach where if someone was not cooperating, if a victim wasn't cooperating with the prosecution, they'd outright dismiss it no matter what. And what we're trying to do is we're working with law enforcement, and we've also created a domestic violence specific police affidavit, so they're collecting evidence in a different way than they had been before. But we're working on having strong evidence-based cases, and so we're working on the ability to bring cases to trial even if someone doesn't support the prosecution, where we're confident that they have been assaulted, where there's injury, where we have all the pieces except for their cooperation, in order to try to protect them in the long run.
And sometimes by taking those chances, sometimes you get a conviction, but you also know if the victim isn't cooperating, sometimes that proves a challenge. But that must be frustrating to you, that when you know somebody has been assaulted, and then all of a sudden they decide to recant it and just not help you.
Frustrating isn't the right word. For me, it's challenging. It certainly is, where there are situations where there is a significant history of abuse. We have another incident where they're abused, and what we're trying to do as an office is do everything that we can to protect them. And so a lot of times that means putting a case in front of a jury that maybe the jury will or won't convict on. We have a really difficult time proving in this community cases where we have a recanting victim or a non-cooperative victim, but I am going to continue to put those cases on and put it into the public's hands to decide whether I've determined that case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that shows offenders that I'm serious about these types of cases, and it also that even if they pressure their significant other into not cooperating, that we'll still be going forward on those types of cases.
Why do you think whether the victim is a man or a woman, why do people recant even though there was abuse going on?
Well, that's a really complicated question that we could talk about literally for hours, but it's part of the cycle of battering and domestic violence. So there's a number of reasons why a victim may not cooperate with the prosecution. They could be afraid. They could sympathize with their abuser. They may have been abused for so long and so significantly that they sympathize with them. even if they don't sympathize with them because of the pressure of the ongoing abuse, it could be that, they know they've been assaulted, but because they've been abused for so long, they think they deserve it, or they blame themselves. If I only hadn't done whatever, then this wouldn't have happened. We hear that a lot.
Do you ever get jaded? As in, like, your job is to prosecute people, but you see a different world than many of us see. Like, I tell you all the time, I've even written about my rose-colored glasses. I still think the vast majority of the people in this world are good and decent human beings. And I do believe you believe most of that, but the segment that you're dealing with, you do have some good people who come before you who've made some dumb decisions, but you also get to see details of cases that most of us will never see. Do you get jaded because of that?
It's something that I try hard not to do. It is sometimes difficult. What I do to try to combat that is be involved in other community events where I see people who are not just coming through the criminal justice system, and that helps me focus on how there's a greater good out there.
Right. Yeah, I know you have, and you were involved with Dr. Lockridge's recent fundraiser where you got to meet normal people. You're even coming to my daughter's wedding, and I guess we're resemblance of normal.
Reasonably normal.
Reasonably normal. All right, we only have like another 10 minutes left. What do you envision for the future here? Because you know what? I hate to tell you, that was a hard race you went through. And without a doubt, the best person won. But in another 2 years, you'll be doing it all over again. What do you want to have accomplished before then?
Well, a lot of the things I have wanted to accomplish, we've started to implement, and I hope that those carry over for the next 2.5 years. We've been working really hard to make sure that sentences are consistent across the office and that we're taking a real team approach to prosecution. In the past, it seemed as though depending on the attorney that you received, you'd get a different, better or worse sentence. And so we've worked really hard to come up with consistent sentences based on the crimes committed for people who are coming into the Orleans County Courthouse. And that way it won't matter what prosecutor you get, you're going to receive the same sentence based on the offense that was committed.
Do you ever, does a prosecutor, do they take into account of like prison overcrowding, or is that something that that's not your thing to worry about? Your job is to get them prosecuted, and if they deserve jail, they get jail.
That is the state's attorney's position. Certainly the courts are pressured in keeping people out of jail. They're consistently feeling pressured not to put people in jail. The Department of Corrections is certainly pressured into not putting people in jail, but we advocate for what is a fair sentence, and if we're concerned about public safety, we're not going to let overcrowding or funding get in the way of what's an appropriate sentence.
Right. But we've talked about some heavy-duty criminals, murderers, abusers, but you do have some people, as I said, who are decent people who've done something stupid. You do take that into consideration, after you do your research and realize that, yeah, this person needs to pay a price, but are you into second chances, like going to diversion and stuff like that?
Absolutely. We look at every case. We look at the crime that was committed, the person as a whole, mitigating circumstances, and we look at what's fair. And if it's somebody who made a dumb mistake, a lot of times that's diversion. If it's somebody who's driving without their license, we're trying to help them get their licenses back, and we're giving them benefits or we're giving them different sentences if they can get their license back, so they're not coming back to us 10, 20, 30 times. And so, of course, we take into account the person and their circumstances.
Right. Yeah, because, I've known people who've gone all their lives, and all of a sudden there was a, whoops, what was I thinking? What was I thinking type of thing. And I know diversion, is that still called diversion now?
Yes.
Right. Because is there different programs that people can go through, or is it just diversion?
Yeah, we also have the restorative justice program, and that's similar. It's a community-based board that you'd appear in front of, and they determine how to make the community whole and what the appropriate punishment is, whether that's community service, a letter of apology, maybe some counseling. And so that can be done without a conviction or with a conviction. So it can be done as part of probation or as a straight sentence. Could be that you're convicted of the crime and then your sentence is to go in front of the reparative board. Or it can be used as a pre-charge program so that similar to diversion, where if they complete the program in the community-based board, that they wouldn't have a conviction.
Now, I know you have a lot of tenacity, and I know you love arguing a case. But on the other hand, wouldn't you rather just be able to sit there and twiddle your thumbs because there was no crime left? As in, like, no crime. As in everything was good, like in my world.
Well, those are your rose-colored glasses.
In other words, it's not going to happen, but you would rather have a slowdown in your office because nobody was committing crimes anymore.
I think in a perfect world, yes, we would like to see that.
And don't let me be one of your deputies. Because,
I wouldn't hire you, Scott.
Oh, no,
You'd let them all go.
Okay. Okay, I'll let you go this time. Just, pinky promise me that you won't do it again. No, I'd be horrible unless it involved domestic violence, and especially on kids. Like, I know this is your 10th time driving without a license. I know you didn't know it. You didn't, No, I'd be horrible. I'm too nice of a guy. Not saying that you're not a nice person. Just out of curiosity, as the prosecutor, and as a darn good one, do you ever find yourself in a disagreement with a friend or your spouse and find yourself going into prosecutor mode?
My husband and I had to make a promise. He's a police officer and I'm a lawyer. So we promised each other very early on that he wouldn't cop me if I didn't lawyer him in arguments. So
who wins?
I do.
Yeah,
of course I do.
And from the and to the viewers, I will assure you she does, because every once in a while I'll ask you what you're thinking, and I know you have no clue what I'm thinking. So what other trends are you seeing here?
We've had a really surprising number of high blow DUIs, and when I say high blow, I mean high data master tests. So the DUI cases that are coming in aren't generally just somebody out driving a little bit over the legal limit. We're seeing a lot of numbers that are double and triple the legal limit and with crashes. And so that's been a really shocking trend in our community, and I'm not sure the reason behind that, but we've just seen a number of very serious DUIs.
I'm going to tell you, I know what it is. I do, and I mean this seriously. I believe that at one point, all of our beer, particularly beer, was, a certain percentage of alcohol. So you knew what you were drinking. But I've talked to people who had, they had 4 or 5 beers, but they didn't understand that it's like 0.08 beer. And I truly believe that some people just don't understand that, like, a natural light is not the same as having a natural ice. Natural ice has more alcohol. And I really do believe that that people are not understanding the alcohol content. Now, granted, you're not supposed to drive after drinking no matter what, but I do believe that if you talk to the people who have these high alcohol content when they're arrested, if you talk to them, I bet you'd find out that was partly to blame. I really do. Some people who are viewing this or listening to it are going to tell me I'm all wet, but from personal experience, when I'm out stacking wood, I like to have 2 or 3 beers. Well, first of all, I look at the alcohol content because, I like to have 2 or 3 beers, but by the time I'm done piling wood, I don't want to be so intoxicated. So I do. I really believe that's part of the problem.
That may be one factor. I'm not sure that it explains the number of cases that we have at triple the legal limit, above a 0.2. I think that might play in as some factor, but I'm not sure that's entirely the problem.
Well, Jen, it was great having you on, because you did promise during the election that you were going to come on my radio show, you were going to come on my TV show, because you do want to stay in touch with the community, because you don't want to just be out there just busting people. You want to be part of the community.
That's true. Thanks for having me, Scott, and I appreciate it. And I think the community wants to know how things are going in the office, so I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about how things are going in the office.
And by the way, is you do a great when you're on TV, which you've been on a few times. You've been interviewed. You do such an outstanding job. You're poised. You know exactly what you want to say, and it comes out so perfect. And it's so good to know that somebody like you and your team are representing, the Orleans County State's Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Scott.
So, okay, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.